the VR Report podcast with David Jean O.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is David O from the VR Report, and I have a very special guest, Chris Wren. Chris, what's going on, man?
Hey, Dave. Welcome to the UltraLeap offices here in San Francisco. I'm here to talk to you about Handtracking.
Fantastic. Hey, can you briefly talk about your origin story for the audience?
Sure. I am from the Bay Area. I went to school here, University of San Francisco, and I immediately went into video games. I was working for companies like Microprose, doing flight sims. Falcon 4 was a big one. I worked on The Sims at EA for a long time at Maxis. And then I was at Namco doing some cool Warhammer games. I went into teaching for a little bit, doing some professor of game design instruction. And then I found myself doing some hand tracking and VR cool stuff. And I ran into a company called UltraHaptics. And they were doing some stuff that just blew my mind. I said, I don't know how you do that, but I want to learn. And that turned into an interview, which turned into a job. And here I am.
Tell me about the state of UltraLeap today and what are you working on?
So UltraLeap just launched our 6th generation hand tracking called Hyperion just a couple weeks ago. It's really focused on what we've learned from the VR training and simulation market, which is we do the high end really well, accuracy, reliability. These are our core tenets of like where we separate ourselves, I think, from the pack. And in that market, accuracy and reliability is everything. So we've really tried to gear our training models and everything towards their specific use cases, including things like tracking objects. So we just started looking beyond hands to track things like fiducial markers, as well as tracking the hands on those objects, things like micro-gesturing, as well as custom models using the cameras for other purposes. We're trying to open it up and make just an ecosystem that's really friendly to enterprise.
There's a lot of things happening in the XR space since you've been involved. One of the things that's been happening that people are discussing about is Microsoft.
Yeah.
MRTK, their framework to be able to incorporate mixed reality. They've been deprecating a lot of the things because they've been also laying off a lot of staff. They also had this relationship with Samsung. They were going to release a headset together.
Sure.
That didn't happen. With also the recent layoffs with the HoloLens team, they also formed a relationship with Meta. What do you think about Microsoft and HoloLens today?
Yeah, interesting bedfellows all around, I think. When you think about just like these companies and getting together, and sometimes you think of them as like direct competitors, but then all of a sudden they make a deal and you're like, I wonder what that's about. And then you're like, Xbox and Meta. Interesting. OpenAI changed Microsoft's game plan considerably a couple of years back, and they really dug deep into it and decided to start taking a backseat on XR. And they said XR is not going to be our focus. If you go back 10 years, Microsoft was, hardcore in the background making these headsets, the HoloLens 2, and they were geared largely towards like government, military use case. The Jedi IVAS projects were like, big multi-billion-dollar contracts they were going for. Those are out in the field. They're working on them. It's still like a work in progress. And the commercial side of HoloLens did not take off the way that I think they intended. They have their own platform, UWP, that I think is challenging for a lot of developers to work with. At its core, HoloLens was amazing. I mean, it was an all-in-one device before anybody else had an all-in-one device that literally had SLAM tracking, had a little bit of hand tracking in it. It really kind of set the stage for what was to come. But it in and of itself did not have a great experience in terms of the visuals. And so where we saw the VR market kind of fill in that gap more recently was just really good visuals, but not really pass through and seeing the real world or augmenting the real world so much as just representing a really good visual look around VR experience. And so as they rolled out this thing called mixed reality, they were trying to get into that VR market. And they tried to create a standard similar to like DirectX was in the early gaming days, a platform that everybody could build on that would be easy to propagate VR content across the whole ecosystem. And there were several developers. We had like Dell, Acer, Asus, HP, Samsung had the Odyssey. There were like 6 different headsets that adopted this, and it was built into Windows. So if you just owned Windows, you had mixed reality built into it already. You just had to plug in the headset and it should work. Most of those headsets try to get away from the outside-in tracking, like we saw with the early Oculus and the Vive setups with HTC. No base stations. They all had some kind of inside-out SLAM. For better or worse, I think the SLAM that was coming off those headsets wasn't quite as good as we were seeing from Valve and the base stations. And so I think it suffered. I think there were some compatibility issues also with just trying different headsets, different computers, and it wasn't always easy to just plug and play any of these headsets. And so there was some issues there. By and large, it was a great effort, and it did advance the industry. But what we've seen since then, companies like Dell and HP, and they all got out of the headset business. They decided that this wasn't a well-supported platform, it's not that it didn't have the support early, it's just that there were other contenders like Meta and things that came in that really started to dominate that market and made it unfriendly, I think, for this larger ecosystem of wired headsets. So I think, by and large, that was not successful. MRTK was an interesting kind of offshoot of that, which was kind of a standardized platform they originally used for HoloLens to show off all the cool hand tracking and other functionality that was on HoloLens. But it became this medium that you could get at through like a game engine like Unity. Anybody can get into, load up the MRTK example scene and start testing. And what was nice is that you could use the MRTK platform across lots of different headsets, across a lot of different technologies, whether it was eye tracking, hand tracking, and different proprietors of those technologies. And it became kind of a generic sandbox that anybody could test their content against existing hardware and existing content. So the whole industry, I think, it just adopted it as a great way to test out virtual interactions. And for a long time, that was the case. I think that was like the medium that most people used to compare different hardware or different software solutions. And then all of a sudden, MRTK, HoloLens decides to do this OpenAI thing a couple of years ago. They start to downsize the HoloLens team. The MRT group gets spread out. Some of them go to Qualcomm or UltraLeap or other places. The MRTK working group, which we're still a part of, is still going and it's still active. And we're trying to figure out, like, what is the next stage of this? You know, how are we going to create a new platform in the new environment? And the new environment is like a much advanced Unity that has some OpenXR and has some great XRI, XR hands, and other kind of solutions. And MRTK is trying to find its feet still. Like, how do I fit in without the HoloLens, without, you know? And so it's there, and the people that are involved in it are passionate and want to see this ecosystem flourish. And I think that's its goal. And I think it's in the wake of kind of Microsoft deleveraging its XR investment right now. These groups are trying to figure out, how do we create a platform that everybody can work on again? And I think I don't think they care what company they're at. I think they care about creating an environment in which this thrives.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that, you know, the standards, like the example you brought up with DirectX, that really pushed the standards so everyone understood the same framework to be able to build immersive products and not have to deal with a really disjointed ecosystem and to be for help support developers. What other aspects of standards, like there's WebGL, what other standards are necessary, do you think, to progress the industry forward?
There's a lot of talk about cloud gaming, cloud XR, cloud content delivery, and we're seeing 5G and Wi-Fi 6 and other mediums kind of come up to speed to where the latency and the gaps that you would normally see in that environment are starting to go away. NVIDIA's had some great attacks at that with GeForce Go. There's Google with Stadia had a pretty good effort against that. And there were even predecessors to all this idea of not having to have a supercomputer in your house, that we can stream content from a distant. And then edge computing comes along, and we start to think about computers that are a little bit closer, and so maybe the transmission doesn't have to have so much latency, you know, turnaround time. And so it's coming back to that. And we're starting to see the next generation of headsets, the lighter weight ones, not so much the full VR headsets, but the AR headsets are starting to talk a lot about streaming. And so we've got chipsets out there like the AR1 and AR2. AR1 is kind of a standalone chip. It's designed to have everything on the headset, whereas AR2 is not. It's almost geared towards streaming. It's saying we're expecting a bigger computer somewhere else to be pushing that content to this headset. This headset doesn't have to have all that content. And so the dream is that you don't have to have as much hardware on your head. In other words, this is mostly a screen with some sensors to take in interactions and other data. But for the most part, I don't need the whole computer on my head, which can be, you know, costly in terms of batteries, which is just more weight and uncomfort. And then there's just the cost of all the sensors and things. Everything just gets cheaper, lighter, faster. And you start to get to those form factors in AR that I think people have in the back of their mind. It's like a pair of glasses, right? And we're seeing inroads to that with things like the Facebook Ray-Bans. I guess they call them Meta Ray-Bans, sorry. Meta Ray-Bans. Really lightweight headset. Doesn't have a lot of compute on it. I think it is the AR1 chipset actually, but it's using cameras, and it's basically using itself as a camera and voice input system with some audio. And then they still expect some compute coming off your phone, or maybe tethered to a PC somewhere. But I think that's the direction the industry really would like to be. I think they'd be there already if not for some of the network and latency issues we've seen. Like, I think 5G was a dream that I've heard about for a decade that I'm still waiting for the promise of it to show up. But it's that idea of the telecoms see the value of it. They want it to happen. They're pushing hard, but they're also trying to adapt to an existing infrastructure, which I think is challenging for them. With, you know, when you're dependent on the internet, other people's problems become your problems. And so it's really challenging. If you're a gamer, it doesn't matter what you're using it for, but you're dependent on something you don't have total control over, and that's challenging. So as we get into edge and you start having more localized clusters, I think that's going to go away.
Yeah, and speaking of headsets, I'm really excited about the announcement of Palmer Luckey, the creator of Oculus, announcing his new headset for AWE, which is around the corner.
Yeah.
Palmer Luckey, who founded Oculus and that headset, he went off to do a lot of interesting things. He actually just recently announced a Game Boy clone that you can actually chromatic that you can actually play your Game Boy games in higher resolution, and of course Enduro Technologies, which he created these drone technologies for the military. I think that startup is worth valued at $12.5 billion,
which is bonkers.
Which is bonkers. What are you expecting to hear from Palmer Luckey on round 2 of his new headset?
It's really, so AWE, the Augmented World Expo, is happening in a couple weeks down in Long Beach, California, and Palmer Luckey is one of the keynotes. And we haven't heard from him a lot in the XR space much. He's chimed in on a few developments as they've happened, but he hasn't really been involved much in XR. Going back to 2012, he was the one that I would say kickstarted this era of VR. He showed up at E3 in, I think, 2012 with his DK1 with John Carmack, and they showed it off. And I was a game industry guy at that time, so I didn't go to that E3, but I had a lot of friends who went and said, you need to check this out. It was really interesting because VR had been around for a while. They had these big, VRX and other headsets that had been around for a while, but they were bulky. The experience wasn't good. The latency was horrible. And the video game industry had all this 20 years prior and just said, we don't care. We don't need that to sell games. It's not making a better game experience. We'll wait for the technology to come along. Well, it was exactly that guy, Palmer Luckey, and exactly that moment that kind of made it practical. That made it the right price, the right experience, easy to work with, and all of that just kind of opened up this entire industry. So what he's going to do now, he's obviously gone through his meta cycle and he's out of meta. He started Anduril, as you mentioned. Now he's doing Game Boys, which is interesting. He's had some interesting announcements about headsets that are lethal in the past and some other things. So I'm very curious I would assume that it's kind of enterprise or military or government focused in some way. Maybe not. You get a person like that has a large amount of money now and motivation, he may redefine the industry again. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. And I think in terms of gaming and also natural interaction with your hands, UltraLeap has been doing a lot of cool things around the development community, like Half-Life Alyx, and incorporating your technology into gaming itself. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Handtracking, we're a hand-tracking company. Handtracking and gaming it seems like a natural fit, and there just hasn't been a lot of content. And when you talk to game developers, they look at volume. They want to look at what is the biggest market out there. They want to hit the game consoles because there's like tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of those out there. So they're going to make a lot of money if they can hit that target. When you start thinking about the VR headsets, even a few years ago, there weren't that many out there. 1 million, maybe 2 million total out there. Now we're looking at numbers in the 20s and 30s and 40 million headsets starting to hit the market. There's a market all of a sudden. It's not competitive yet with the game industry and the consoles and the PC gaming, but it's getting there to the point where it's valuable enough for developers to come over and start making content for it. So you have a fair amount of content. As long as I see your hand, which can be anywhere the camera can see you, I can put that sensation on your hand. So I can have the radio over here or over here or over here. It doesn't matter. So it's got a lot of advantages, but fixed environment is really kind of the key. So for things like training, it makes a little bit of sense if you have a fixed location for VR training. I like it a lot. Automotive is a great use case. We've used it in public settings for like posters for advertising and stuff, just to have sensations with interactive posters. So there's some great use cases out there.
I've always said that, the biggest use case is hygiene, especially in the post-COVID world. Not being able to touch screens, wow, a gesture just makes more sense. In terms of developers and how they're working within the UltraLeap ecosystem today, what advice can you give them in terms of prototyping and being able to build experiences that can give them a cheat sheet of integrating hands in their VR experiences?
There's a few of those. So let me start with the most basic, which is, again, we're building on the modality of if someone sees a screen in public, they assume it's a touch screen. They immediately want to touch it. So one of the things we learned early when we started exploring that space was we want to get your attention early. So the beauty is we have a camera, we can see you, and we can see that you're approaching and that your hand's out there. Like we see your hand before it gets to touching the screen. We want to get your attention before you touch that screen and let you know that this is a new way of interacting. And so we have to somehow give that feedback to the user quickly. So the second your hand is recognized, we want to show it on screen. We want to let you know that you're in control. You have agency over the screen without having to touch it. And then we have to give you feedback very quickly about how that hand interacts. We have to let you know that you are now touching that button and that button is now being pressed. And this may be somebody that's never experienced hand tracking before. They're in a public environment and they're trying to use a screen and they immediately want to go to touch screen. And we have to teach them in about 1 to 2 seconds, it's not touch screen and this is how you interact with it. And so sometimes it's like, we'll do like ghost hands where we show kind of what the hands could do or how they interact. Or we have a pop-up that shows you, you can press this button or you can drag this item over here. But it's a challenging environment because it's public and you don't know what class of user you're going to get. You might have a prosumer who's like super savvy and can do whatever you want, or you might have somebody that's really challenged to use a touchscreen. And so you have to create a set of instructions that works for everyone in a very short amount of time. Otherwise, you get frustrated. It's a new modality. I don't know why my mouse isn't working. I don't know why the touchscreen's not working. And you don't have enough time to like course correct. And so you have to get it right the first time or else you're going to have a bad experience.
That's fantastic. In terms of this year, with all the extra things that are happening out in the space, what are you most excited about XR as a technology? I'm most excited about AI and having that AI layer, also AI being able to support hand tracking. Well, how do you think AI fits into hand tracking and gestures today?
We're seeing, this is definitely like the year of it. It's called the year of AI, the year of VR, year of whatever you want it to be. But this has definitely been an AI year. ChatGPT and OpenAI last year kind of kicked this off. We've seen some great efforts from companies like Midjourney, which has a lot of Leap Motion roots, as you know.
Oh, let's talk about that. So a lot of people don't know, Leap Motion was co-founded by David Holtz. David Holtz, after the acquisition, David Holtz went on to create Midjourney, which has been the rage of being able to use Gen AI to prompt any type of imagery you want. Anyone can be a great illustrator today. A lot of people don't know about his story from that transitioning from machine learning, AI, and then how that transforms into generative AI. Give me your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, most people probably don't think of UltraLeap as an AI company, but we have been for over a decade. Leap Motion in its earliest days was figuring out how do I use computer vision and AI machine learning training algorithms to understand that's a hand and what is that hand doing and building a skeleton and all these things. All that came from exactly the same kind of training models that we see for the LLMs today. They're doing it slightly different, but a lot of this was pioneered, and David was very much ahead of his time in figuring out how to use machine learning to generate hand tracking. So what absolutely astounds me is that like what he went after right after this was not just, something like tracking, but how do we make art? I mean, Sam Altman, I think, said something similar, like nobody expected AI to go after the creative jobs first, but David pretty well proved that it's a serious threat to like existing traditional art. And I don't think anybody expected it to have the results that it had in its first year, not just Midjourney, but Stable Diffusion. All the other ones out there have just been amazing at generating art, replacing not just like the copywriters who are writing press releases, but now, hey, we're replacing the artists who are making the advertisements. They're creating really beautiful AI-generated art. But at its core, it's very similar mentality in terms of like what you're looking for, how you train your models, how you adapt them to do new things. And we're doing that constantly with hand tracking, but David's found a way to just do it at another level with imagery now that's getting into videos and 3D like splats and, just some really interesting, like we're really just scratching the surface of what's possible there. And so I am blown away by that. Now, with respect to XR, AI has shown its face in the sense of having agents that you can talk to in almost any experience, whether it's a VR experience, but it's adding a lot of value to these lightweight headsets, more than I expected. So something as simple as a pair of glasses that maybe have a camera on it, as long as it has a microphone and it can talk to some other device, you have access to an AI agent it is becoming very powerful and soon to be very personal. And I expect this is just kind of an expected layer of information that we'll have access to at all times. And so it's a kind of an easy add to almost any experience. In gaming, they talk about NPCs and things, but you have one that now you can talk to for like all day if you want to, and you never hear the same thing twice and have a meaningful conversation. And yet still they'll keep you on task, requests and things. That's really interesting to me. I think within a social environment, having real people and AI agents kind of intermingling is very interesting. I think just having that sidekick of, what do you think? And it's just always something, and it could factor into like some of the overlay stuff we were talking about earlier, where like your AI agents are just kind of living alongside you in your game world. And so you're like, hey, throw me that ammunition. Like, cool.
Yeah, I still think that we're still in the early phases of where AI agents become meaningful in conversation. I don't know if you checked out InWorld. I really love the technology, but at the same time, having those meaningful conversations that don't feel canned, we're still at that point, but I think we're almost solving that problem where we're going to actually be in these virtual worlds, whether or not Meta, even in their closed Quest ecosystem, allows OpenAI and ChatGPT, or maybe it's Llama.
Probably Llama.
Probably Llama. And when that actually happens, we're now going to be actually interacting with these virtual beings like never before. And with Gen AI prompts to even create video, I think all of that's going to converge together, which is going to be a really crazy future.
I think the personability of it is going to be more like customization. You're going to have your own AI. That's going to be different than mine. And maybe it's because you subscribe to the pro version of whatever AI is out there. Maybe you're a billionaire, a whale that can like spend $1 billion on the world's best AI, so I have the best whatever sidekick. That maybe that happens. But the idea of making it personal, I think, is going to continue on. Like you're going to have an AI, just like your Google search history, that knows you pretty well, that knows like what kind of things to provide you with. It's going to be like that, I think, where we kind of evolved our own personal AIs to be something that we rely on, that is the outputs from are meaningful to me, but not necessarily to you, because they are so tethered to my whole history and what I care about and what's interesting to me. So I think that's going to be the case. And so it's going to be a battle of AIs. I really think it's going to be like who's got the best AI, and not just who has the best, but who's done the most training with it. And that's what, like your news feeds and things. I don't know if you start a news feed and it's like, it's kind of generic, but then it really kind of hones itself down as you start, making likes and things, down to where it's like this is what I care about. And I think the AI is going to be very similar to like something that we interact with that is going to just be very personal. And I think with respect to games, I think it's going to add to that. VR and XR social interactions, I think it's going to aid in that in a huge way. So AI with respect to jobs, I mean, I think, Dave, you and I have talked about this in the past. How long until they replace all of us? Because it's not just art, and it's not just, writing press releases and things. It really is something that's going to go after, I think, almost every job on the planet. And when you go after the creative ones first, those are the ones that I thought would be the safest in this whole environment of, you can do my taxes, or you can, AI is going to do that just fine. Now it's doing art. And so, and we're going to see movies. There's going to be a movie very soon. I don't know when, but sometime next year, we're going to see a full-length movie that's actually going to be pretty good. And within 5 or 10 years, probably better than one of the better movies you've seen. And so we're getting to this point where it's just really starting to replace the jobs we didn't think it was going to replace. So what do you think about the rest of the jobs? And so I really do think that we're all at risk of like, what about this universal income? How is that? And how much do I get for that?
Well, I'm a little more optimistic. I think we're still going to be able to leverage it as a tool. But at the same time, I think there is that uncertainty. And we see that a lot in the tech sector, which gives food for thought. Any closing statements for the audience?
AWE is coming up in 2 weeks. We're excited to be there. We're going to be showing off the new Hyperion stuff. There's, we got new classes of sensors coming and stuff. We're going to get away from these bulky headsets. We've been working with a company called Prophecy out of France that has a really cool event sensor. It's not really a camera. I don't want to call it a camera. They're very tiny. They use almost no power. They sample at a super high rate, and they're almost perfect for hand tracking. We've integrated with them. We've done some demonstrations at CES earlier in the year. I think that sort of technology, things that people haven't heard of, new sensors are going to lead to a new class of headsets that are going to be more capable than the ones we see today. I think right now we're reliant on a lot of older RGB cameras and things they're technologies that really aren't ideal for tracking. These are really like custom technologies that really just solve the problems that we need in a very lightweight, low battery power kind of way that, you're talking about a pair of glasses, this is one of the catalysts that's going to make that kind of thing possible.
I'm super excited about that. Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah. Appreciate it, Dave.
Boom.
Always.